So I've been building these speakers now for a few years. It's a pretty slow project. I'm finally at a stage where I'm ready to finish them off. I had an idea with the baffle to make it a piano gloss black, but I just couldn't achieve that. So I've come back to a satin finish on the front baffle. Um, and then to finish off the rest of the cabinets, I've just gone with a paper-backed walnut veneer. Now in this video, I just want to show you how I am applying that veneer to the cabinets. So there's a few methods of applying veneer to an MDF substrate as we have here. What I have chosen to do is the iron-on method. And what I mean by that is that we apply a very fine film of glue, in this case the Titebond II. And we apply that to both the speaker and the veneer, and then we let that dry for 30 minutes to an hour, basically until it's touch dry. And then we use a dry iron. This one has no steam option, so there's no chance of sort of ruining your veneer by accidental steam. And you basically just iron it on, and it kind of reactivates the glue, I suppose. Once you've got it on, I just use a blade like this to trim it, and as you can see, it's not in any kind of handle, and there's a reason for that, which I will get to. There's a few little things that I've picked up along the way that make life a bit easier, so I'll basically show you how I go from start to finish applying this to one surface. You can see from the speaker I've already done a couple of the surfaces. I've actually only got the top to go, and I will show you what the finished product looks like, because this is actually my second speaker. I'm so close to finishing this project. So the first thing you want to make sure is that the surface that you're about to apply the veneer to hasn't got any edges that are raised from the rest of the surface, because what you don't want is for there to be any sort of voids between that lip and the rest of the surface that you're applying the veneer to. And when that's most likely going to occur is when you've already done the veneering on one side and you haven't perfectly trimmed it flush. You could use a flush trim route a bit. You've just got to be really careful that you don't, if you're running that bearing along the veneer surface, that you don't sort of bruise that veneer that might show up later when you're trying to apply a fine finish. I like to use these blades to trim it down as close as I can, sort of dragging it along the surface like that. And then to finish it off, sand a bit of sandpaper. But make sure your sanding block that you use is hard and not like a soft sponge, because you don't want to round those edges off, which is easier to do with the sponge style blocks. So here I've just got a bit of sandpaper that's actually glued onto a bit of MDF, and I know that it's going to sand and leave a perfectly square edge. Alright, edges are flush, and as you can see I've used a little bit of really low tack masking tape here just to stop me or protect the painted surface from being scratched up while I was sanding. Just obviously you try and be careful, but you don't want to accidentally muck up a paint job and have to remask the whole thing to paint the front again, like I've done a couple of times already. So hopefully when we peel that off, this has been months since I've painted this, so the paint is well and truly cured, and so we're not expecting any disasters there, and we didn't get any. So then you get your bit of veneer that you've cut out, and sort of size it up, position it in as you think it's going to go. Make sure it's got a little bit of overlap there. And that's how this one's going to go. I'm just going to keep the grain coming up from the sides and over the top. On the back it won't match up because the grain's going up and down to match as if it's wrapping around. But to be honest, this is my first veneering job, and I've just used a very cheap veneer without too much detail in it, so it's not too hard to make it look reasonable. Right, the glue. So we're also going to use a bit of the masking tape while I'm applying the glue to the speaker all the way around the edge. Now I'm being really careful while I apply it, but I don't want any glue to run down over the veneer, which might impact the finish later on. And also I'm going to put another piece back along the top here because I don't want any glue getting in there. And then once we've got it all on, once we've got the glue on and it's not running, you can pretty much take that tape off straight away if you're concerned about the adhesive from the tape starting to pull wood fibres out of the veneer or potentially damage your paint job. Beautiful. Same thing goes for the back of your veneer. Although here you can see I've already got a bit of tape on the table. That's because I can't put any tape over the front of this veneer because I need the glue to go all the way up to the edge. But I don't want the glue to roll over onto my table, and also don't really want it to roll back onto the surface of the veneer that we're using. So we're just going to put a nice big bit across the back of it like that to hold it in place. And then we'll just hold the corners down and we'll just go nice and close to the edge because this hasn't got a huge amount of overlap. And that should stop it curling out once we start rolling the glue. Now, to roll the glue, I'm using a paint roller with a sponge roller on it. This is usually sold as like a gloss paint roller, so it's not like it's not a cloth one that leaves like a textured surface or anything. It probably doesn't really matter if you do, but you don't really want big lumps of glue on your surfaces. Then we just, with the Titebond II, we just kind of squiggle it all over the surface, roll it out till it's nice and smooth, and then we can go and have a cup of tea. Glue on. We don't want it running over the edge, even though we've got that tape there to protect all the other surfaces. So just put whatever you think is a reasonable amount. You can always add more later. And you get your roller. If you really wanted to, or if you were doing a really large surface, you could probably use a like a paint roller kind of bucket thing to load up your roller, like you would if you were painting. But this eventually loads the roller up, and you don't waste any glue, which, it's not the cheapest stuff. Just probably put a bit too much there on those edges, so we'll just bring them in a bit. And we'll finish off that edge a bit later. Now what we're looking for is a nice even coverage. I'll try and give you a close-up in a minute so you can see what we're looking at. You can kind of see it better from an angle because you can kind of see the shine where the glue's covered. And you can see I'm going over the edges now because I haven't really got big dollops of glue that are going to run down. It's really important that you get glue over the entire surface because it's basically impossible if you get a little corner that you missed and isn't stuck down to sort of neatly squeeze a bit of glue in there and re-iron, let alone if you've missed a bit, a bit in the middle here somewhere that you just can't get the glue into that space. So I'm pretty happy with that. I might just add a little bit more. You can kind of hear it. You can hear the roller. And you get down on an angle and make sure you can't see any dry spots. You'll see a nice uniform, even coverage. Perfect. All right, onto the veneer piece. Just wanted to show you from this angle, you can see now the shine across the top. And you can see that there's no dry patches, so we are good to go. Sorry, a bit close there, a bit out of focus. But that surface is good, so we're going to come back in like half an hour to an hour after we've done the veneer piece and finish it off. Alright, time to do the piece of veneer. Same principle, glue everywhere. With this one, I haven't taped down the sides. I normally tape down all the sides, but there's not as much overlap here, so I don't really want to risk applying my glue and then having tape covered an area that I needed glue to access. Also, you might be wondering what this daggy looking towel is doing here. It's just covering, this was one of the jigs I used to actually build the speakers. You can see more of that. I did a slideshow of that. I'll put the link in the description. And I just use that jig now whenever I'm working on the speakers, because it holds, I can put the speaker on its side and it holds it sort of nicely like that. Anyway, back to the glue. I think this is where the paper-backed veneer really helps if you're a first-time veneerer like me. From what I've read, if it's not paper-backed, it's really fragile. You can damage it really easily, and obviously, and you're generally using more exotic timbers, so the veneers that you've bought are more expensive. So, by all means, go for it if that's your thing. For me, I couldn't really afford the emotional roller coaster of spending that much money on a few sheets of veneer and then stuffing it up and having to start all over again, especially considering how long I've kind of been building these speakers. As far as the iron setting goes, it's trial and error really. It needs to be hot enough to get the glue going, but obviously not so hot that you scorch your veneer. Probably not a bad idea to do it on a test piece and maybe do the whole process on a couple of test pieces. But anyway, just letting this heat up, and we'll get stuck into it. Okay, you can see I've taken the tape off around the edge. It's because I don't want to glue it in between this veneer piece and the speaker, and then sort of have to pick it out later. I always start with the most with the edge that is sort of the most important, the most visible, and for me it is this leading edge, because everything else can sort of just make do, provided this leading edge is in place. So luckily for me, it's nice and straight, and the veneer is straight, so it's kind of, I'm quite happy with that. Just check that when you do sort of tack it down there, that you've got overlap on every surface, and you're not going to glue it into place and then have to sort of unglue it and all the rest of it. I haven't had to unglue this before, but I imagine it would be a pain in the neck. So holding everything down, just sort of start to apply a bit of heat to the edge. Again, like I said, if you're worried about scorching the veneer, grab yourself a tea towel and iron through that. I actually use a tea towel, but it's more to apply pressure after I've heated the glue, so it's set and it doesn't lift off again. I'm just using my hands now, so they'll go numb eventually. Yeah, the next steps I do a rough trim, and this is why I don't have a handle on these blades, because if you had a handle there, you'd be the blade would be going in on an angle. This way you can almost sit it flush, and I just gradually, without the handle, you can sit the blade flush and just sort of gradually work it around. And with this veneer, you can kind of score it enough and then crack it against the, especially against the grain like that, and it sort of pops down quite easily. Once you've done your rough cut, I just run my finger up like that and try and find bits that haven't glued down. I'll do my trim and then I'll try and find some of those bits and show you. Yeah, the next steps I do a rough trim, and this is why I don't have a handle on these blades, is because if you had a handle there, you'd be the blade would be going in on an angle. This way you can almost sit it flush, and I just gradually, without the handle, you can sit the blade flush and just sort of gradually work it around. And with this veneer, you can kind of score it enough and then crack it against the, especially against the grain like that, and it sort of pops down quite easily. Once you've done your rough cut, I just run my finger up like that and try and find bits that haven't glued down. I'll do my trim and then I'll try and find some of those bits and show you. So work your way across that lead surface. You need to put quite a lot of pressure on. And obviously I need to be careful here not to burn the paint job as well. You probably could leave that tape on. I don't leave that tape on because I'm kind of nervous about sticking the tape down too hard and then damaging the paint job. And then from there, it's just a simple process of working methodically through so you don't leave any bubbles or gaps until you're all the way to the end. So it's basically done now. The next steps I do are a rough trim. I'll just show you this. This is where I've done a couple of passes underneath, and we're just going to push down on the edge. And you can just see it just comes quite nicely. Needs a little bit more there, so I'm not going to force it because I don't want to rip into that top bit. But there, really neat. I wanted to show you here how neatly the veneer snaps off once you've made a few passes. And I'm basically just finding the edge, and then because we've got a nice sharp edge, just pressing down, and it's just cracking. And you see if you can push that down a bit, if that doesn't focus. Once we sand that off, there's hardly any work there as far as trim goes with sanding, and you can just blunt the edge, and away you go. Okay, this is what I'm talking about with the edge. I want you to just listen into this, see if you can hear this. Hear that? Sounds different. Glued. Glued. Pitch lowers a bit, not glued. And if you look, you can see, hard to see, but that needs a bit more ironing. And that's why it's good to leave a little bit of a lip so you can actually use it to test. Oh. Well, there's the finished veneer. I've sanded that top down, and now we've got a nice edge that meets there, if you can sort of see. And I haven't really gone into how I finish the veneer off, but basically I use one coat of a sanding sealer. I'm using Feast Watson. It's an Australian brand, and I'm in Australia, so. And then after that, I use a buffing oil. And if you want to see what it ends up like, have a look at my other video where I go through and talk about finishing these speakers. Thanks for watching World According to Ted. I know it was a long video, but hopefully if you're thinking of doing a veneering job, this has helped you sort of know what to expect, and good luck with it.